Hello all, welcome. Yes. Hello all, welcome to yet another live session of Narayana IAS Academy. It's really exciting to meet you guys once again after some time with the three topics that are important for discussion having been taken from the Indian Express, again the Indian Express as well as the Hindu. So these topics actually become very important as well as relevant for the UPSC CSE examination. So now let us quickly have a brief look on the topics that we've actually taken for discussion for today's DNA. So as you know, this is Surekha Bhaskar presenting to you the daily news analysis. Now let's quickly get into the discussion, okay? So the first topic that we've picked up in order to discuss today is on way to climate resilience, because as we know, of late we've actually been discussing a lot about climate change, the vagaries of climate change, the impact, and what's the kind of resilience and adaptation methods or the mitigation methods that the countries are actually taking up in order to deal with that of the climate change. So this particular article here, we'll try to understand what is the difference between climate mitigation, what do you mean by climate adaptation, what do you mean by climatic resilience, is there any global agenda in order to deal with the adaptation, etc., is what we'll be discussing here. So the first article will be mains based, okay, because climate change and the analysis of climate change is what is being asked in the examination mostly in your mains examination. Moving on, the second article that we've actually picked up for a prelims perspective or prelims discussion is microRNA. Okay, so recently there have been, the Nobel Prize has been announced 2024 for physiology or medicine, and that is for the discovery of this microRNA, which is important. And what is the role and the responsibility in the performance of this microRNA for the day-to-day functions of our body becomes very important. And moving on, the third article has been picked up from page number 9 of the Hindu, nations with mineral reserves needed for energy transition. So as you know that the global economies are actually focusing on transitioning towards low carbon emission strategies. Here we need to understand what are all the mineral reserves that actually help us to reach that particular target. So these are the three topics, and towards the end of the session we'll be solving 2 MCQs as well as the mains practice question. So now let us actually quickly get started. Yeah, so the first topic that we'll actually be discussing now is on way to climate resilience. Okay, so what do you mean by climate resilience is what we'll be discussing in this particular. Yeah, so on way to climate resilience, as I already discussed, here you need to know about certain important terms. Okay, that is, what is the meaning of climate resilience? What do you mean by climate adaptation? And at the same time, what do you mean by climate mitigation? So these topics become very important, or understanding these concepts become very important for your mains examination in particular, and any kind of agreements or conventions that have been signed with respect to the same becomes important for your prelims examination. Okay, so in this particular article we'll be discussing about the climate change adaptation, that is how the global communities are trying to adapt to the vagaries of climate. Next is the global goal on adaptation, which is called as GGA. When it was actually adopted, was it a key agenda of the Paris Climate Conference, that is COP15, which actually took place in 2015? All these things will actually be seen. And here this particular topic becomes very important specifically for your mains examination, paper 3, environmental pollution, degradation as well as conservation. Okay. Now moving forward, here, as as we already always discuss, that any topic that we actually pick up, we need to see its reference or the relevance, that is whether that particular topic has appeared in the previous years. Okay, so similarly in the 2017 mains examination there was a question asked on climate change, which actually says climate change is a global problem, and how would India be affected by climate change, and how Himalayan and coastal states of India will be affected by climate change. So here, climate change is the broader topic. And what we need to understand, how apart from how nationally we are actually affected by climate change, we also have to know how the global community have been undergoing the impacts of climate change. So overall, you need to prepare for all these dimensions. Okay, sometimes it can be how is India prepared for the mitigation, how is India's adaptation strategies, how is its resilience in handling the impacts of climate change. This can also be the question in the mains examination. Okay. So moving forward, let us understand why this particular article has appeared in the news. So, despite the adoption of a global goal on adaptation, so here it is very simple. What do you mean by global goal on adaptation? All the world, countries, they actually came together and they adopted a global goal on adaptation. What do you mean by adaptation? So here, this is where we need to understand the term adaptation and how it is different from mitigation. Okay. So mitigation is nothing but we are trying to reduce the emission of greenhouse gases so that we don't further contribute to the increase in the climate change. So that is called as mitigation. So prevention or reduction of greenhouse gases is called as mitigation. But what do you mean by adaptation? Adaptation here is that the damage is already caused. Okay, the effects of climate change are already there. It is already evident in the environment. But how are we going to further adapt to those effects? This is what is called as adaptation. Okay, so here all the global communities actually came together and they had signed a global goal on adaptation. Okay, and this here we'll be discussing about the fact that despite this particular GGA, that is global goal on adaptation, was adapted, there are significant gaps in the adaptation efforts and this still continues to exist. Okay, so this is what this particular article is discussing about. So now let us quickly move to the next one in understanding the broader concept of it. Yeah, so here, what do you mean by the climate change adaptation? I've already explained it to you. So here, don't look at the, the paragraphs or the number of lines written here. You just have to take away the concepts, okay? Because learning the concepts in the class is what will help you recollect and reproduce that in the examination. Even in case this same topic does not appear in your examination, what happens? Something related to that you can actually shape, maneuver and reproduce in your paper. So what do you mean by climate change adaptation? This is nothing but the processes, the strategies and the measures that the countries actually undertake for what? In order to reduce the adverse effects of climate change. Okay, so the measures that the societies undertake to reduce the adverse effects of climate change and adjust to the impacts. This is very important. Adjusting to the impacts. This is important. So unlike climate mitigation, what do you mean by mitigation? Here the focus is on reducing the greenhouse gases, whereas if you see adaptation is nothing but adjusting in all ways, in social ways, environmental ways, economic ways, to manage the unavoidable effects of climate change. And if you see the Paris Agreement in 2015, this has actually recognized that adaptation is one of the key component of the long-term global response to the climate change in order to protect the people, the livelihoods as well as the ecosystem. So this is what it says. Moving on, now here we'll understand exactly what do you mean by the difference between mitigation as well as adaptation. Okay, so let us look at this particular diagram. Okay, this is not visible. Yeah. So if you actually look at this particular mitigation here, mitigation actually involves using renewable energy. Why do we use renewable energy? We use it in order to decrease the or reduce the release of greenhouse gas. The next one is we use more efficient industrial processes so that the effluents and the emissions are actually reduced. Next we use eco-friendly transportation, that is we do not prefer using fossil fuels, but we actually use alternate fuels. Next one is seasonal eating, and less meat. Okay, so these are the examples of mitigation strategies. Whereas what do you mean by adaptation? Adaptation is nothing but it actually has more resilient agriculture species. What do you mean by that? We use climate resilient crops, right? Climate resilient crops. Why are they used? Because the effect is already there. The effect is what? It is the increased temperature. That is why in order to adjust or to be adapting to the increasing temperature, we use climate resilient agricultural species. Next one, there is delimitation of coastal risk areas. Next one is entomological surveillance. Next one, we actually build flood barriers in the urban spaces. And however, there is a synergy between the mitigation and the adaptation strategies where increase in urban green areas. This what happens is that this actually helps or it acts as a mitigation, that is it reduces the GHG. At the same time it acts as adaptation as well, okay, because the sequestration and all those things actually takes place. Next one, raising awareness. Next is water as well as energy conservation. Okay, so this is what is called as mitigation as well as adaptation. Now moving forward, let us see, why is climate adaptation very crucial? We know because there is inevitable climate change and its impacts that is actually going on in our environment. That is, what are they saying is, first reason why there is climate adaptation required is inevitable climate impacts. So what do you mean by inevitable climate impacts? Is that despite the global efforts in order to reduce emissions, that is global community have been reducing it, but some degree of climate change is inevitable because of the historical damage that we've already committed to the environment. And here adaptation is essential in order to manage the resulting impacts. Next one, there are vulnerable population, that is developing nations, particularly if you see in the tropical regions, they are more vulnerable to the effects of climate change because they experience rising sea level rise, and then there is a lot of crop failure, so that it actually causes food insecurity, etc. So this is this one. Next one, there is a cause of economic stability. Okay, so this is why there is economic instability and this is why there is need for climate adaptation. That is, without adaptation, climate change can severely affect the economic activities, especially in sectors, if you see agriculture, you see fisheries, you can see even tourism. All these things are climate sensitive. So this is what? This is why we actually feel that this climate adaptation is crucial. So here, having discussed what is adaptation, mitigation and stuff, here we need to know what are the various methods that can be used or that can be deployed in climate adaptation. First one is infrastructure based adaptation. First one is infrastructure based adaptation. This is nothing but you need to always build, not only with respect to crops, the infrastructure can also be climate resilient. Okay, so climate resilient infrastructure, because you can always construct the flood barriers, climate proof roofs, sea walls, etc. in order to decrease the intrusion into the coastal areas. Next one, ecosystem based adaptation. This is nothing but when you actually restore mangroves, when you restore the greenery, the forest, the wetlands in order to reduce the flood risk, as well as at the same time these actually act as the carbon sinks. Okay, for example, if you take mangroves, these act as a synergy between mitigation and adaptation. How do I say that this actually acts as a synergy? It is that when you restore mangroves, okay, so when you are restoring mangroves, what happens is that this acts as, or it helps in carbon sequestration. Sequestration means what? It actually acts as natural carbon sinks. It absorbs it, okay, and it actually reduces the greenhouse gases. That is how it actually acts as a restoring agent, or you can say it actually helps in mitigating strategy. Next one, how do I say that this acts as an agent of adaptation? This provides protection or prevention to flooding. So that is how because already there is increase in the temperature, increase in the emission of GHG. There is actually increase in the global temperature, because of which the sea level rises. There's going to be intrusion into the coastal areas. That way, while if you actually restore your mangroves, what happens? It prevents the flooding. Okay, so it helps in both mitigation as well as the adaptation strategies. So here mangroves is actually taken as an example. Next one is agricultural adaptation. This is nothing but, as I already told you, these climate resilient crops, the drought resilient crops, and high yielding seeds, as well as improving the irrigation efficiency. All this actually helps, it is a method of climate adaptation. The next one is water resource management. That is, there is efficient use of resources, that is water resources, like recycling of water resources in order to manage the decreasing availability of fresh water. There is a lot of groundwater depletion, etc., right? So that is what it's spoken. Next one, there is urban adaptation. Here you implement the green roofs, we actually enhance the drainage systems and develop heat action plans to combat extreme weather. So these are various methods of climate adaptation. Now moving forward, what is the global goal on adaptation? I told you, right? The world communities actually came together in order to adopt this, climate, global goal on adaptation. Let's read it quickly. It is a set of objectives or the targets, okay? It is a set of objectives or the targets that actually aim to guide and to measure what has been the progress and effectiveness of climate adaptations across the world. It was established as per Article 7.1 of the Paris Agreement. This recognizes adaptation. That is, this particular article of the Paris Agreement recognizes this adaptation as a key component of the global response to climate change with mitigation and finance. Okay, so along with mitigation and finance, also recognizes adaptation as one of the key tenets. Next one, it means it serves a unifying framework that can drive. That is, when you need if you have a global goal, what happens? That will actually drive your political action as well as the finances and the funds that are directed towards it, right? Next, however, defining and operationalizing has been very, very complex and a contentious process. Okay, so this is what is the global goal on adaptation. Now moving forward, let us actually see what is the current state of this particular GGA. Okay, so what is the current state of this climate adaptation and the global goal on adaptation? So progress, if you see, we can see this is not that very difficult a topic. You just have to understand what is the concept. So basically, so far as so much we have actually discussed, what is climate change. Next one, what are the driving factors of climate change. That is, you have the increasing emission, industrial pollution, all these things are there, anthropological activities, etc. Then you discuss about various dimensions under climate change. That is, what you mean by climate resilience, what do you mean by climate adaptation, what do you mean by climate mitigation. Okay, so after understanding those concepts, you need to know the different methods. Like, for example, if it is climate mitigation, what are the ways that we solve this climate mitigation? That is, in order to reduce the GHG emissions into the atmosphere. Next, we see about the adaptation strategies. We also look at the strategies which form a synergy between both the both the things, that is mitigation as well as adaptation. Then we look into various methods, like in urban areas, how can it be done? How can it be done by efficient water management, irrigation, then the resilient cropping pattern, etc. Now moving on, we actually saw what do you mean by this global agenda. This was actually adopted according to Article 7.1 of the Paris Convention. Now what is the current status? Whether countries have followed it or not, whether they have been able to progress with it, whether they were able to achieve their output, all these things we'll be discussing here in the current state. Okay, so here, looking at the growing awareness, there is increasing recognition of the need and urgency of adaptation. Next, moving forward, there is widespread adoption also, because if you see, as per the estimates of UNEP, that is United Nations Environmental Programme Adaptation Gap Report of 2023, the recent one, You can see 85% of the countries have adopted at least one national level adaptation planning instrument. Okay, either it can be building flood barriers, either it can be restoration of forest, agroforestry, mangroves, etc., or CCUS system for carbon sequestration, all these things. Next, 69% of the countries have a central administrative body which is overseeing all these processes. Next one, 67% of countries are allocating domestic finance also for implementing this. Next one, growing body of knowledge on the effectiveness. Okay, for example, a study by Global Commission of Adaptation in 2019, it found that if you invest few trillion dollars into this adaptation, what happens? It could actually generate so much net benefits by the year 2030. Okay, so all these figures are not important, but you need to know how important is for us to adopt this particular adaptation strategy or the goal. Now moving forward, the next one, what are the gaps? So apart, despite understanding how important it is for us to take up this adaptation strategies, there are gaps which are prevalent in terms of, there are policy paralysis, there are government hurdles by the governments, and also there are finances, there are a lot of financial gaps, okay, in the funding. So we can see there is inadequate finance for adaptation. That is, according to the 2023 Adaptation Gap Report, global adaptation finance flows are significantly short of the 366 billion needed annually by 2030. And currently, if you see, only $46 billion per year is allocated for adaptation. Next one, unfulfilled commitments. Okay, developed nations have not fulfilled their climate finance commitments at all. Next one, however, they have been historical polluters or emitters. Next one, public climate finance for adaptation. Here if you see, the OECD, that is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, is reported that around $16.8 billion of public climate finance was dedicated to adaptation in 2018, accounting for just 21%. That is, out of the total amount of the climate finance, only 21% actually has been dedicated to this particular adaptation. Moving on, there are lack of clear indicators. Okay, so there are a major gap is there, that is, there is absence of clear and measurable indicators of this particular agenda, making it difficult to monitor and evaluate the process. Moving forward, there are implementation barriers also. I told you there are a lot of governance constraints, there are hurdles in actually getting your clearances and all those things. So there are cultural factors as well, knowledge gaps and conflicts that are prevalent. Okay, now let's move to the next one. What are the challenges and barriers? First one, of course, we do not know that when certainly what will happen. Okay, so such complex and uncertain is the phenomena of climate change. So this particular uncertainty and complexity of climate change makes it very difficult to predict and project the future impacts and the risk of climate change. So ultimately, our planning is actually missing over there. Next one, the lack of political will and commitment. Again, the same thing. Then we have inadequate coordination and collaboration between different stakeholders over here. There is fragmentation of adaptations of actions and outcomes even between different countries who have adopted this particular agenda. Next, there is limited awareness and understanding of what does adaptation actually mean. Next one, the inadequate capacity and the skills for adaptation, which limits the ability and the quality of adaptation planning and implementation, and the generation and use of this particular knowledge and evidence. We do not know how effectively we can use all the data which is generated. So this is what is actually spoken about over here. Now moving forward, what is a synergy? As I already told you, there is a synergy between adaptation and mitigation, and one best example that I gave you was mangroves. Okay, so here let us actually discuss about it. Okay, so while adaptation and mitigation are often viewed as separate components of climate change, usually they are actually seen as separate components because one totally focuses on reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, that is mitigation. Other focuses on adapting to the already caused effects or the impacts of climate change. So these are seen as two different components, but less is that we notice that there are synergies between the two, and this can lead to more effective outcomes. For example, best example will be your mangroves. For example, restoring the mangroves not only sequesters the carbon, this becomes what to say, mitigation, but also provides coastal protection against the storm surges and the flooding, and this creates a win-win situation. So hereby it causes adaptation as well. So integrating both the adaptation and mitigation into policies, this actually allows a good short-term climate resilience strategy with long-term emissions reductions. Very, 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 very important line. So sometimes these lines can also be asked in your examination, paraphrased as a mains question. So an integrated approach like this, where there is a synergy between adaptation and mitigation domain, it has to be ensured that this is taken, also contribute to mitigation goals, enhancing the overall climate security. So this is what is the synergy about. Now if you see, this is the synergy, okay. So it can help you in some mitigation efforts, can help you in adaptation as well, such as mangroves. Whereas some adaptation measures can actually what to say, prevent, or it can even stop the mitigation in a negative way. That is actually called as maladaptation. Okay, let us see, for example, if you see, mitigation actions sometimes increase the exposure and vulnerability to climate change. For example, if you are actually going for investments in hydropower, why we go for investments in hydropower? In order to reduce the GHG. So this is seen as a mitigation strategy, right? But what happens? You are establishing the hydropower plants in a place where it actually in a hazard prone area. Okay, so that again disturbs the adaptation. So this is called as maladaptation. And one more thing, like vice versa, how adaptation actually hampers mitigation. I'll give you an example. Just because there is a lot of climate change, there is increased what to say, temperature, etc., we install these air conditioners, right? That is a process of adaptation. But what am I indirectly doing? Again releasing the GHGs into the atmosphere and further increasing the effects of climate change. So this is what it is here. Adaptation actions that undermine mitigation effects, example air conditioning investments, and these are called as trade-offs. So how can this be protected or prevented? Is that we need to have a different kind of knowledge and information in order to take an informed policy decision. Also, we need to have distinct stakeholders as well as distinct distributional impacts, that is global mitigation versus local adaptation benefits. Okay, so that is what I told you. Synergy actually acts as an advantage, whereas there are trade-offs also where you actually think that there would be a synergy, but each of it hampers the other. So this is what this particular point is actually talking about. Now, this is the last part of this article. What are the recommendations and actions for climate adaptation and the GGAs? That first one is talking about adaptation finance, where they actually say that the developed countries actually need to meet their financial commitments, and they need to make sure that this particular finance reaches the most vulnerable communities. So this is what they need to know. Also, there has to be extreme transparency in how this climate finance actually flows. Okay, next one, there has to be capacity building. Here what to say, all the stakeholders, not only the government but also the private players must actually join hands, and this actually includes they have to involve themselves and have a coordinated approach towards training the policymakers, the local authorities and communities in adaptation planning. Next one is locally led adaptation. This is nothing but this must be inclusive and it has to be locally driven. Okay, so it has to have the indigenous knowledge as well and address the specific vulnerabilities of the marginalized communities. Next one, there has to be clear indicators and monitoring systems. This you actually know. Developing, there has to be very clear as well as measurable indicators, and there has to be steps in progressing towards this GGA. Next one, there has to be technology transfer and innovation. That is, the developing countries actually require access to the technological advancements of the developed countries. So, developed countries must actually come forward and give a helping hand over here. Next is there has to be global governance and coordination. That is what our conference of parties actually meet together, and they have a yearly sitting in order to discuss the climate targets, such as one that is COP28 that actually took place in UAE, and 29 that is coming up in Baku, Azerbaijan. Okay. So by this way, you need to understand all the COP, what is their agenda, what are their climatic targets, and how it actually aligns with the sustainable development goals. And that day, as we discussed here, you need to know climate action falls under SDG 13. Okay. So this becomes very, very important. You need to know what are these conference parties, whether it is a decision making body, whether it is a part of UNFCCC, when was it adopted, what was the recent one, India's role in it, how we have progressed further. All this becomes important for your examination. So, moving forward, conclusion. So, how do you actually conclude this particular analytical topic is that we need to say that this climate adaptation and this global agenda, it is very, very, very important for us in order to enhance our resilience towards climate change, as it is a part of the Sustainable Development Goal 13 that talks about climate action. So, however, there has been little progress. So, while the progress exists, there are significant gaps in terms of, implementation, in terms of finance, etc. So, accelerating, that is, we need to accelerate efforts and we need to foster global cooperation and governance, and these actually become very, very crucial in order to protect a vulnerable population and also ensure a sustainable future. So, this is it with this particular topic. So, here I hope you actually understood this broader, topic of climate change, what is mitigation, etc. So now it will be easier for you to answer any kind of a question that comes in the examination with respect to that of climate finance, with respect to that of the COP, how you can link that with this mitigation and adaptation strategies. All that becomes easier for you. Now let us move towards the next topic, a very, very interesting topic. So microRNA. Tiny RNAs, as the name depicts, that hold key to how organisms develop. So here you might not understand what is this article been speaking about. So here what happened? The Nobel Prize for Medicine or Physiology has actually been given to these two people, Victor Ambros as well as Gary Ruvkon. Okay, so these people have been awarded the Nobel Prize for Physiology or Medicine for their discovery in microRNA. So it is important for us to understand about microRNA. So one basic mistake we always do is when we are discussing a topic, we forget to go to the basics and brush up, because one thing we are lazy, next thing is that we don't understand anything. So these sessions of DNA are there in order to ease these topics for you. For example, if I'm going to discuss about this Nobel Prize with respect to microRNA, I would first start by introducing the concept of what is RNA first. You need to understand what is RNA. So if you understand the concept of RNA, most of you will immediately ask, how is it different from that of the DNA? Okay, so if you know what is RNA and DNA, we will actually have doubts on what is their, exact composition, whether it is a helix structure. What do you mean by helix structure? Why is it actually called as, DNA, deoxyribose? Why does the name actually come from? All this becomes, very important for us to understand, so that it actually stays with us forever, because knowledge is eternal, right? So now, moving forward, so in this particular article, as I actually told you, we'll be discussing about the microRNA. For that, I'll give you a backgrounder of what is RNA, the functions, etc. Next one, this particular topic becomes important for your prelims under general science, and for your mains examination, important for GS paper 3, science and technology, developments and their applications and effects in everyday life. Okay. So now let's move forward. RNA has already been there in one of your prelims examination in 2016. These kind of concepts, specifically when a Nobel Prize is given in the field of medicine or physics, etc. What, why, and what is the process involved? What is so, astounding and amusing, so that that particular discovery has actually been awarded the Nobel Prize is what we need to understand. Now moving forward, let us understand what this article is talking about. The 2024 Nobel Prize in Physiology of a Medicine has been awarded to these two people for their groundbreaking discovery of microRNAs and their role in regulating gene expression. Now, most of you won't understand what do you mean by gene expression, right? So, in this session, we will actually clarify all your basic concepts, okay? So, here let us actually start by understanding what do you mean by DNA. So, what do you mean by DNA? DNA actually stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. Let me write it again. DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. So why is it called as deoxyribo? Because the ribose, this ribose is the sugar which is present inside the DNA molecule. So this ribose actually has a missing oxygen atom. So without oxygen, missing oxygen atom. So deoxyribo. Okay. So this ribose has become deoxyribose. So this is actually nothing but the sugar which is present inside the DNA molecule. That is why it is called as the deoxyribonucleic. Why is it called as nucleic? Because it is made up of different or various nucleotides. What do you mean by nucleotides? These are the building blocks of RNA. Sorry, DNA. Okay. So, DNA or RNA, nucleotides are actually the building blocks of these genetic material. Now, we need to understand what do you mean by DNA? Now, we understood why the name came from. What do you mean by DNA is that DNA is nothing but it is a particular molecule that actually stores all your genetic information. Okay, genetic information which are actually transferred to you from your parents. That is how you look. These are genes, you know, often we actually say these are genes. You have a curly hair because it is a transfer of the genetic material from your ancestors, your parents, etc. So this is the molecule that stores all the genetic information. And where is actually the DNA present? It is found in the nucleus. Okay, it is found in the nucleus of your cells. Okay, now if you look at the structure of this DNA, it has a double helix structure. What do you mean by double helix structure? So this is a structure of a ladder, right? So when the ladder is twisted, what happens? It looks like this. So that is the structure of your DNA. So it has a double helical structure. Do you understand? And this double helical structure actually has special molecules that are present over here. What are the special molecules? They are called as A, T, C, G. What are they? It is nothing but the adenine, the thymine, the cytosine as well as the guanine. Okay. So all this, don't worry, it will be given in your notes. Don't worry. So the adenine, these are arranged like this. Okay. So here adenine actually pairs with thymine, and here you have the guanine pairing with your cytosine. Okay. So this is a double helical structure of the DNA. Okay. So this actually basically stores all your genetic information. Now let us see how this particular DNA is different from that of RNA. So what is RNA? RNA actually stands for your ribose nucleic acid, because it has that additional oxygen atom. Okay, so that is what this ribose sugar that is present inside this RNA. That is why it actually has its name ribose nucleic acid. So ribose nucleic, since I told you DNA, it actually contains all the information. What is the role of RNA? In simple terms, it is a helper to the DNA. Okay. So RNA is considered to be helper to that of the DNA. In what way I say helper? Because all the set of information that is actually present here, RNA is used to read or decode that information in order to build the proteins. Okay, the proteins are used for building various tissues which are essential for the day-to-day functioning of our body. And where are these RNA actually found? I told you that DNA is found inside the nucleus, but where RNA is found, it is present inside the cytoplasm. That is the liquid which is actually present in your cells and also in the nucleus. And if you see the structure of the RNA, it is actually a single helix structure. So it actually looks like this. Okay. And this also has special molecules that are actually there. These actually include the adenine, the guanine, and then you have the cytosine, and instead of thymine, you have the uracil. Okay, so this is only in terms of structure. So the presence of this uracil makes the structure of the RNA slightly different from that of the DNA. So RNA is comparatively lesser stable than that of the DNA. Okay, so now we've actually understood what is the difference between the DNA as well as the RNA. Okay, now moving forward, in simple terms, I can actually explain in a very simple term. Now that you've understood DNA as well as RNA, first of all, consider a chef. He wants to actually cook food in your kitchen with by seeing the recipe in a book. Okay, so the recipe is present inside this book, right? This book is actually nothing but your nucleus, and the recipe that is present here is called as the DNA. And a part of recipe is used for cooking, that is called as RNA, which reads this information, and then it is used for making the food, that is nothing but building of your proteins in your kitchen, that is nothing but in the cytoplasm. So this is the best way to remember this DNA as well as RNA. Now let's move forward in understanding what the article is actually discussing about. So let's quickly go through that. So I told you what is RNA. It is nothing but ribonucleic acid. It is an important biological molecule that plays several key roles in coding, in decoding, in regulation and expression of genes. So our body actually has genes, right? So what do you mean by coding? Coding is nothing but writing the what to say, instructions in order to build the proteins. Okay, so you write a code, right? So that is called as coding. So even in simple terms, what do you mean by code? We write down the instructions in order to build something. This is called as coding. What do you mean by decoding? Here is that you understand this particular instructions in order to, you decode the instructions in order to build the protein, that is called as. Next one, something is called as regulation. What do you mean by regulation? This is nothing but, regulation means this acts as a control system to the genes. What do you mean by control system? There are certain genes in our body that are too active. So in order to make it lesser active, and there are certain genes that are inactive in order to incite some kind of activity, this regulation is actually being done. And finally, expression of genes. What is expression of genes? All the the gene information is actually read, and finally the protein is actually made. That is called as expression of a gene. So here, do you understand all the terms? I hope you've understood all the terms. And I was looking for some comment section, but okay, fine. Let's move forward. So RNA is similar to that of DNA, but it has a few differences. We already discussed. RNA is single-stranded, DNA double-stranded. RNA consists of sugar called ribose, and it has a base called as the uracil instead of thymine found in DNA. I already discussed all this. Next one, function is RNA's main job is to convert the instructions which are present in the DNA into the proteins, already discussed, which are essential for various functions in the body. So now understanding RNA has become very easy. Now moving forward, What has been the recent discovery for which the Nobel Prize has actually been awarded? It is because of this microRNA, right? Let's understand what do you mean by microRNA? These are smaller molecules which are made of RNA. Simple. So, these are small molecules made of RNA that actually do not produce the proteins themselves, but they help control the process by which the proteins are produced. Okay, so microRNAs are not capable of producing the proteins themselves, but they are capable to regulate the process that is used for the production of proteins, and they are typically about 20 to 22 nucleotides long. So this is the nucleotide structure I told you, right? So that is what it is, and they act like switches that turn certain genes on, that certain genes off, depending on what the cell needs. We already saw this was called as the regulation. Next one, the microRNAs bind themselves to the messenger RNA, which carries, what is messenger RNA? It carries the message, okay? So it carries the instructions from DNA to make the proteins, and binding to the mRNA, this microRNAs prevent it from making proteins, or they break down the mRNA, which reduces the number of proteins that are produced. So this is what is the function of the RNA. Now, what is more important for us is to understand, beyond understanding what is microRNA, we need to know why is this important. Because it is used for gene regulation, we saw, right? In order to control the activation and how much active a gene is, it is actually used to determine that. The second one is development, okay? So, during the development of an organism, the functioning of this microRNA is very, very important. They actually help the cells to grow, they help the cells to divide, as well as develop into specialized cells also. That is, specialized cells is any kind of muscle cells, any kind of skin cells, nerve cells, etc. Also, it helps to prevent diseases. How? Because it controls the genes involved in the growth of the cells as well as death. When the microRNAs malfunction, it can also, lead to, very big diseases such as the cancer, where the cells grow uncontrollably, or other conditions like diabetes as well as heart problems as well. And now, the other significance of this is that it has therapeutic potential. We actually saw that is in order to develop treatments for various kind of diseases. Okay. Next one is that it actually plays an important role in evolution. So what does that mean? Is that they are found in almost all the living organisms, which show that they have played a fundamental role in the evolution of complex life forms also, and they help these organisms respond to different changes and control important life processes. Okay, so this is what is the concept and the significance of this microRNA that has actually been developed recently. So such kind of why such Nobel Prize has been given, for what kind of discovery, and how is it actually going to enhance? For example, if it is given in the field of medicine, how is it going to make medicine more easier or more advanced in handling these autoimmune and other kind of diseases? So these are the questions that you need to be prepared for while reading such articles. The last article that we'll be discussing about is nations with mineral reserves need for energy transition. Okay, so as the article's name suggests, here we'll be looking into various minerals which are actually required for. Okay, so here we'll be looking into various minerals which are, required for a clean and a green future, because as you know, the world communities have been transitioning towards using non-renewable, energy resources. Okay, that is, they are actually moving from using fossil fuels towards alternative renewable energy resources. Sorry, I think I have told non-renewable. We are moving towards renewable energy sources. Okay, so renewable energy sources. So in this transition, what are the number of minerals that is actually helping us in advancing further, either giving us technological advancements, scientific advancements, etc. And where are these minerals actually found across the globe, and what are the reserves that India actually has, okay, in order to move towards this energy transition. All these things we'll be discussing in this particular article. So here we'll be discussing about what is the meaning of energy transition and the minerals which are crucial for it. The topic becomes important for GS paper 3, Indian economy and issues relating to planning, mobilization of resources, growth, development and employment. So now let's move to looking at the previous year question. There has been a previous year question in 2019 with respect to that of the management of minor minerals. So these kind of resources, specifically minerals, major minerals, minor minerals, rare earth minerals, critical minerals, all these become very, very important for both your prelims as well as mains examination. So here you need to have a hang of what are they, how it is significant and all those things, and in which, what are the resources that India actually has, and the status is important for the examination. Now, let us understand why this topic was in news. So, the world, the global communities have intensified their efforts in order to combat climate change, okay. So, in that process, what happens is that they are transitioning from using these fossil fuels to renewable energy as well as these low carbon energy sources. So, this has become a global priority. So, in that transition, let us see what do you mean by that transition, first of all? So, energy transition is nothing but it is a global shift from reliance on traditional fossil fuels. What have been the traditional fossil fuels? It includes coal, oil, natural gas, etc., to more sustainable and renewable energy sources, such as you move towards from using coal and oil, you move towards using solar, that is the sunshine, as well as wind, hydropower, as well as geothermal energy, okay, then tidal energy, etc. So this is what is called energy transition, moving away or a global shift from the reliance on the fossil fuels towards the renewable source of energy. What is the primary goal of this? Is to reduce the GHG and to combat the climate change in a more sustainable as well as a secure way. So this is what this particular energy transition means. Now, what are the key minerals which are needed for energy transition? Let's quickly go through this because there's nothing much to understand over here. It's just as to you need to take note of these key minerals, where are their location is, and which are the reserves that India has. That becomes even more important, okay, because in one of your prelims examination there was a question on what were the minerals that contributed to these batteries that actually run the EVs, okay. So it's very important. So first one, let's see, it is the bauxite. It is nothing but a primary source of aluminium, okay, because it is an ore of aluminium. So primary source of aluminium, and it is actually essential for wind turbines, solar panels, the batteries, any kind of electrolyzers, as well as transmission cables. So which are the countries that actually abound by it is Guinea, Vietnam and Australia. They have the highest reserves. Moving towards is chromium. This is important for geothermal and concentrated solar power. This is used in turbines and also for shielding the nuclear power plants, etc. Here you have Kazakhstan, countries like South Africa, as well as India have the highest reserves. Very important. Here you have India. Next one is cobalt. Here used in consumer electronics, catalyst for oil industry, and resistant metal alloys, as well as critical components in lithium ion battery, etc. Where are they found? Congo, Australia and countries like Indonesia. Moving forward is copper. Here you have, this is majorly found in South America, in the Chile, Peru region, and also in Australia, where it is used in solar photovoltaics, wind power, battery storage, as well as electricity grids. Next is graphite. It is a key component of battery anodes, and therefore it is important for transitioning electric vehicles, very important, and stationary batteries also, okay. Next one, this is actually found in China, Brazil, countries like Mozambique, etc. These have the highest reserves. The next one, moving on to lithium and then manganese. Lithium, it's a core component of lithium ion batteries, and here it is found again in Chile, Argentina as well as Australia. And now moving on to manganese, it is widely used in solar and wind power, again used in batteries, found in South Africa, Australia and China. Moving forward is molybdenum, nickel and rare earths. Similarly, you need to know what are rare earths also. Okay, rare earths, these are a set of 17 metallic elements. If you see across your periodic table, you will know. These include the lanthanides on the periodic table plus the scandium and yttrium. Okay, these are used in wind power for permanent magnets and it is found in countries like China, Vietnam, Brazil. These have the highest numbers. Okay, again, if you see molybdenum, this is found across China, US, Peru, etc. And nickel, it's a key component in cathodes again of batteries in electric cars. And here it is found in Indonesia, Australia, Brazil. All these countries actually have larger deposits. Finally, if you see, you have silver as well as uranium. Silver, it is actually, it plays an important role in clean energy because it is used in solar photovoltaics as well as electric vehicles. And so it is actually found in countries like Peru, Australia as well as Russia. And finally, uranium. Uranium is actually nuclear material, right? It is used for the nuclear energy production and it is found in Namibia, it is found in Canada as well and Kazakhstan. So now, based on the topics that we've discussed, let's actually solve the prelims practice questions. The first question reads, which of the following statement best explains the importance of microRNAs? So from the discussion, they help in evolution complex of life forms. Yes, this is correct. But here it asks which best explains. So whichever statement is the best suitable option, we'll actually choose it. This is correct. They are primarily involved in the process of protein synthesis. Next one, they are responsible for creating mutations in the genes. Next is they play multiple roles including gene regulation, the development, the prevention, and they have therapeutic applications and also contributes to evolution. So this is the most apt answer when compared to all the other options. So here the answer will be option C. Now moving forward. Yeah. The second question reads, rare earth elements are essential for which of the following applications? First one, wind turbine magnets. I hope you recall the rare earth minerals, okay? So they actually include the lanthanides and all as we discussed in the periodic table. So here they are essential for wind turbine magnets. Yes, this is correct. Next is electric vehicle motors. Yes, this is correct. Solar voltaic cells, no. And fuel cells, no. Select the correct answer giving the code below. So since 1 and 2 are correct, here it is option B. So this is your answer. Now moving forward, let us actually solve one mains question. Okay. So what does the question mean? What does the question read? What do you understand about climate adaptation and provide an account of the current global state of climate adaptation and the global goal on adaptation? Simple. What do you mean by adaptation? Is what we've already discussed, is it? So here we'll actually discuss in parts, that is introduction, body as well as conclusion. In the introduction, we'll be talking about what do you exactly mean by adaptation, okay, in order to adjust to the adverse effects of the climate change and how it is different from that of mitigation is what we will discuss over here. And in the body, we'll talk about key components of climate adaptation, that is how do you improve the resilience of your infrastructure, how do you have to improve your early warning system, how do you have to enhance the agriculture practices for climate resilience, then water resource management strategies, etc. shall be discussed in the body. And apart from this, we'll also be discussing about what is this global goal on adaptation, when it was actually adopted. It is a key agenda alongside the mitigation strategies and financing strategies in the Paris convention or the Paris agreement. Next, you have to discuss about the current global state, how many countries have actually adopted at least one national norms in order to cater to the adaptation norms. And also you need to talk about the global finance that has been there, but then the gaps that is actually there, that is also discussed over here. And then finally, towards the conclusion, we need to actually write a neutral conclusion where we say in order to improve the climate adaptation, measures should actually include scaling up this particular finance, also building the local capacity, You need to promote the locally led adaptation initiatives, develop clear monitoring indicators, and finally facilitate technology transfer for the vulnerable communities from those of the advanced ones. So this is what is the end of this particular mains approach answer. So with this, we've actually come to the end of our discussion, that is the daily news analysis. So this is actually the intent behind reducing the number of topics and discussing them in exclusive detail is to provide a conceptual clarity and a good backgrounder and make it easier for you to understand. So that is why we are actually slow enough in explaining all this. I hope all of you have actually understood and you have actually enjoyed this particular session of daily news analysis. For more live updates, please do like, share and subscribe to Narayana IAS Academy YouTube channel. Thank you and happy Dasara.